Get your old hands off that rifle, Grandma. This is a young man's battlefield. The words, sharp and condescending, came from a 3-star admiral, his polished shoes a stark contrast to the dusty floor. He was reaching for the Barrett M107, a one held by a woman with silver hair and a face carved by time. Vice Admiral Marcus Brennan saw a relic, an artifact from a bygone era. He didn't see the legend the operators around him simply called Eagle Eye, but he was about to feel the unyielding steel in her grip. Before I show you exactly how this 65-year-old veteran put a 3-star admiral in his place, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The scene is set not in some far-off war zone, but deep in the scorched earth of the Nevada desert. This place had a name, the Joint Special Operations Training Center, but everyone who served there called it the Sand Pit. It was a sprawling expanse of baked earth and prefabricated buildings designed to mimic the harshest high desert conditions on the planet. The air tasted of dust, diesel, and the distant, electric tang of ozone from the nearby airbase. Here, the sun didn't just shine, it pressed down with physical weight. Inside a climate-controlled briefing shack, the contrast was stark. The low hum of servers mixed with the quiet, focused energy of men who were the sharpest tip of America's spear. In a corner, away from the digital maps and drone feeds, sat Master Gunnery Sergeant, retired Eleanor Vance. At 65, she was a living paradox in this room of youthful apex predators. Her white hair was tied back in a simple, no-nonsense bun. The lines on her face were a roadmap of a life lived under unforgiving suns, from the sands of Desert Storm to the mountains of the Hindu Kush. She was meticulously tending to her rifle, a heavily customized Barrett M82, a one she affectionately called Long Memory. Her hands, wrinkled and marked with the faint silvery lines of old scars, moved with a surgeon's precision and an artist's familiarity. Every click of the torque wrench, every wipe of the cleaning cloth, was a movement perfected over 40 years of discipline. She was here as a senior tactical consultant, a title that failed to capture her true role. She was a legend, a ghost from the history books brought back to teach the new generation what data sheets and simulators could not. The younger operators, men from SEAL Team 3 and the Army's 2nd Ranger Battalion, spoke of her in hushed, reverent tones. They traded stories, some true, some embellished in a myth, about a shot she supposedly made in Fallujah through a sandstorm, or the time she held a mountain pass alone for 12 hours. To them, she wasn't an old woman. She was the institutional memory of their entire community, the keeper of a sacred craft. Their respect was a quiet, invisible shield around her. That shield, however, meant nothing to the man who strode into the briefing shack at 0755. Vice Admiral Marcus Brennan moved with the unshakable arrogance of a man who had navigated the political currents of Washington far more than the treacherous landscapes of actual combat. He was flanked by an entourage of young lieutenants, whose uniforms were as crisp as their military knowledge was theoretical. Brennan's eyes, accustomed to boardrooms and PowerPoint presentations, swept across the room with dismissive speed. He barely registered the hardened faces of the operators. Instead, his gaze snagged on the anomaly in the corner, the old woman with the big gun. A faint, contemptuous smirk touched his lips. The quiet energy of the room instantly curdled, replaced by a tense, brittle silence as the Admiral and his entourage marched directly towards her, his polished shoes crunching softly on the fine layer of dust that covered everything in the sand pit. The collision was coming. Ignoring the ranking NCOs and officers in the room, Admiral Brennan stopped directly in front of Eleanor's table. He cast a theatrical glance over her rifle, then looked her up and down as if she were a piece of malfunctioning equipment. Well, he began, his voice projecting across the silent room. I was told we were bringing in consultants with relevant, modern experience. My understanding is that today's warfare is about network-centric data fusion and hypersonic response times. He paused for effect. It is not, as I see, an exercise in nostalgia. Master Sergeant Williams of the Rangers, a man with a chest full of ribbons earned the hard way, took a half step forward. Sir, he said, his voice a low rumble of controlled respect. "That's Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance. Her experience is—" Brennan cut him off with a flick of his wrist, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "I'm aware of her file, Master Sergeant. What I'm questioning is the judgment of putting a relic, however decorated, in a position that requires peak physical and mental acuity." He turned his full attention back to Eleanor. "With all due respect, ma'am, shouldn't you be at home, perhaps tending to a garden? What could you possibly offer these young men that they haven't already learned from advanced simulations?" That's when he uttered the line that would detonate the room. "Get your old hands off that rifle, Grandma. This is a young man's battlefield." He reached out, his hand closing around the barrel of long memory, intending to lift it for inspection. It was a gesture of profound disrespect, a violation of the sniper's unwritten, sacred code. You do not touch another shooter's weapon. What happened next was not an act of aggression, but a lesson in physics and 40 years of muscle memory. As Brennan pulled, Eleanor didn't resist. She flowed with his momentum, rotating in her seat, her left hand coming up to meet his wrist. It wasn't a strike. It was a precise, fluid application of leverage. Her fingers found the median nerve with unerring accuracy. She applied pressure, using his own forward momentum to complete a perfect joint manipulation. There was no loud crack of bone, only the sickening, quiet tear of ligaments and a sharp, strangled gasp from the Admiral. He crumpled to one knee, his face a mask of shock and agony. Instantly, two of his lieutenants reached for their sidearms. In response, every operator in the room stood up, their bodies tensing, hands drifting instinctively toward their own holstered pistols. For 3 long seconds, the briefing shack hung on the precipice of a disaster. The air was thick enough to taste. Then, Eleanor broke the silence. She eased the pressure and helped the grimacing Admiral to his feet, her voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's heart. "Sir," she said, without a trace of anger, "you question my capability. Allow me to demonstrate it. Give me 6 targets, any range you choose. If I miss a single one, I'll pack my bags and you'll never hear from me again. Court-martial, if you like. But if I make all 6, you will let me run Overwatch for this mission. No interference." Word of the challenge spread through the sand pit like a brush fire. Within 30 minutes, the remote firing range was lined with spectators. Pilots, mechanics, cooks, and intelligence analysts. Everyone who could break away from their duties came to witness the showdown between the old legend and the arrogant Admiral. Brennan, his pride stung and his hand, now wrapped by a corpsman, personally oversaw the placement of the 6 steel targets. His choices were vindictive, designed to be impossible. They were set at 800, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, and finally, a single plate at a staggering 1,810 meters. The last one was an act of pure malice, a distance that flirted with the absolute ballistic limits of the .50 caliber round in the hot, gusting desert wind. Eleanor approached the firing line with a serene calm that seemed to unnerve the agitated crowd. She didn't hurry. She laid out her shooting mat, adjusted her scope, and simply watched. For 5 minutes, she did nothing but observe the world around her. She studied the shimmering waves of heat, the mirage, rising from the desert floor, reading its subtle language. She felt the fickle crosswind on her cheek, watched it kick up little dust devils in the distance. To her, this wasn't a math problem. It was a conversation with the environment. Her breathing slowed until it was barely perceptible, a state of profound focus she had honed in countless life-or-death situations. Finally, she settled long memory into the familiar cradle of her shoulder. The first shot, at 800 meters, was a formality. A sharp crack, and a second later, a confident clang echoed back. The second, at 1,000, was the same. The crowd began to murmur with appreciation. The third and fourth shots at 1,200 and 1,400 meters required more skill. A vicious gust of wind swept across the range just as she was about to fire on the 4th target. She paused for a single heartbeat, made a minute adjustment invisible to anyone else, and broke the shot. The clang was dead center. The 5th shot, at 1,600 meters was where marksmanship became art. The bullet would be in the air for over 2 seconds, a tiny vessel on an ocean of atmospheric variables. The range fell silent. Eleanor exhaled half a breath and squeezed the trigger. The crowd held a collective breath for the long journey, then erupted in a collective gasp of awe as the plate snapped back. One target remained, 1,810 meters. Nearly 2 kilometers away, the steel plate was a barely visible speck. At that distance, you had to account for the rotation of the Earth itself. The silence was absolute. Brennan stood with his arms crossed, a scowl etched on his face. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. The trigger broke with the clean, crisp snap of a sliver of ice cracking. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, an eternity of waiting. Then, faint but unmistakable, the final plate sang out like a church bell across the vast, empty desert. For a long minute, nobody moved or spoke. Then, Admiral Brennan, his face a complex mixture of disbelief and dawning respect, walked onto the range. He stopped before Eleanor, brought his left hand up, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. In front of everyone, he spoke, his voice clear and humbled. I have never seen shooting like that in my entire career. I let my prejudice override my judgment. I was wrong. The Overwatch is yours, Master Gunnery Sergeant. The atmosphere in the command center 4 hours later was a world away from the tension of the morning. Admiral Brennan, now a changed man, deferred to Eleanor on every critical decision. Intel shows possible sentries on that ridge. Admiral, a young captain, reported. Brennan didn't even look at the map. What does Eagle Eye see? He asked, his voice directed at the comms unit linked to Eleanor's remote hide. Her voice came back, calm and clear. I see them. 8 targets. They won't be a problem. As the mission unfolded, the team on the ground moved like ghosts, their path cleared by an unseen angel. The command center listened to the quiet, professional radio calls. Tango 1 down. The SEAL team leader whispered, after a silenced crack echoed from miles away. A minute later, Tango 2 down. 1 by 1, the sentries fell, none ever hearing the sound of their own demise. The final, critical shot was the stuff of legend. The primary target was moving inside a building, visible for only a split second through a narrow doorway nearly 1,900 meters away. Eagle Eye, we don't have a shot, the team leader said, his voice tight with frustration. Stand by, was all Eleanor replied. A moment of silence, then the distinct sound of a rifle. In the command center, they watched the drone feed as the target collapsed. The mission was a resounding success. All high-value targets captured without a single friendly casualty, thanks to intelligence that prevented 3 future attacks. Back in Washington, Brennan was true to his word. He wrote a commendation that bypassed the usual channels, personally recommending Eleanor Vance for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. More importantly, he used his considerable influence to launch the Vance Initiative, a revolutionary program dedicated to integrating veteran experts like Eleanor back into active training roles, ensuring their hard-won experience wasn't lost to retirement. Months later, Eleanor stood not in a dusty hide, but on a polished stage at the Special Forces Sniper Course at Fort Bragg. She had accepted the position of chief instructor, the oldest in the school's history. Her inaugural lecture wasn't on ballistics or wind reading. It was on humility, on listening, and on the danger of underestimation. Behind her, encased in glass on the wall of honor, sat long memory. She looked out at the faces of the young, eager snipers, the next generation, and saw not an ending, but a continuation. Her legacy wasn't written in reports or medals, but in the knowledge she was now passing on, ensuring the circle of expertise remained unbroken. That day in the desert taught everyone a powerful lesson. True authority isn't found on a collar or a resume, but in proven skill and quiet confidence. It reminds us that wisdom and experience are timeless weapons, and the most dangerous person on any battlefield might just be the one everyone underestimates. True greatness doesn't need to shout. It just needs a target and the discipline to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly based on their age or appearance? What would you have done if you were one of the soldiers in that briefing room, watching a living legend being disrespected? Do you believe that in our fast-paced, modern world, we're starting to lose respect for the wisdom of our elders? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We believe in respectful discussion and want to hear your perspective. If this story about earned respect and timeless skill resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about unsung heroes who defy expectations. Share this with someone who believes that true legends never fade. They just get better with age. We read every single comment, and your voice matters to our community. More stories about incredible individuals who turn the tables are waiting on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another powerful story that deserves to be told.